So anyway, I'm certainly glad to be at this end, and I hope it was all worth it. I won't really know for a few months. Then they're going to take another MRI and compare it with the original one and see if they accomplished anything besides messing me up a little bit. But there is a very famous Meshech Chochmah. I would probably guess the most famous Meshech Chochmah in the entire book. You all know who the Meshech Chochmah was? It was written by Reb Meir Simcha of Dvinsk. He's more commonly known as the Or Sameach. He was an unbelievable genius. It was just he lived in the town of Dvinsk. He died in, I think, 1923 or something, given the time period. And the town of Dvinsk, which was in Litauen, was a very unusual town where you had two super geniuses as the Rabbanim in town. He was like the Misnagdish Rav, and the Hasidish Rav was the Rogatchover. Both were like off the charts, 200 IQ plus. But and he wrote the Meshech Chochmah actually as his parish on Chumash. They say he wrote it when he was like almost a teenager, or a little bit older. That's hard to believe that because it's so sophisticated and it's not just that. I mean, you have to know a lot of Torah, but you also have to have a certain Chochmah Sachai life experience, and it's hard to believe that he had all that as a teenager. But it is known that he didn't publish it till much later after he punished his magnum opus is the Or Sameach, which is a commentary on the Rambam, and he also wrote a lot of chidushim on Gemara. A very special youth, but the Meshech Chochmah.
So the yeshiva Or Sameach is in honor of his sacred.
Yeah, right. They wrote the Happy Light. It's a good name for a Baal Tshuva yeshiva. You went there, right? So I taught there for a while in Monsey, and Meshech Chochmah is actually, I think, the graduate program in Yerushalayim called Meshech Chochmah. I don't know. Anyway, so he in the Meshech Chochmah he writes. For a while in my life, I spent a lot of time going through a lot of it. It's an incredible sefer, and this particular piece is well known. I don't know how many times. Maybe you can tell me if you guys ever heard this, or it's just me. But I've always heard, when they talk about the Rabbanim have a great Ruach HaKodesh almost, and the Gedolim had know things that you wouldn't know. And this is often cited as one of those examples because, as you'll see in it, he says that in his time, the Jews, if they're going to start saying that Berlin is Jerusalem, things will happen to change their mind. And that was like, wow, how did he know that? Well, wow. That is, of course, part of what he says here. I'm going to show you that it's not his chiddush that they said that. That was actually said 50 years before. He was just referencing it. Which doesn't take away at all from what he was saying, but it wasn't like he said Ruach HaKodesh they're going to say such a thing. It had been said before. But anyway, that's why one of the reasons it's famous. Okay, that wouldn't be enough to present it to you just for that. But I think it's an important piece to read just because it really is a very important essay, if you will. He has that in his sefer. If you're familiar with his sefer a little bit, there are a lot of it's just commentary on many psukim, and then he gets into these essays about various aspects of life.
It's not translated to English, right?
What I did was on the second page. I don't want to use the word the money quote, but like the second half of it, I just put it through Microsoft Copilot. I hope it's as a translator. I hope it's a decent translation. It's probably got most of it. So what I plan on doing is reading it with you. Even though my wife says I shouldn't read things for you, she thinks people like to listen, but that's what I came up with for today. And we'll try to talk about it afterwards because I think it is a very, very important essay in many ways, and we'll discuss it together. It's okay. So this pasuk is commentary is on the penultimate which I've learned Tanis means the second to last pasuk in the Tochacha. What's the in Bechukosai? Most of Bechukosai's first half is not half. First 50 psukim maybe. Or well, if you do the right thing, things will go well. And then if you don't do the right things, dun, 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 a lot of stuff happens, right? And I'm not going to discuss the Tochacha really too much, except to say one thing that's always very interesting to read about the Tochacha when you will go through it, is to notice that Hashem basically keeps saying not so much that I will do these things to you, but in telchu imi bekeri v'halachti imachem bekeri. If your modus operandi with me is stuff just happens, then okay, stuff will just happen. In other words,
is the normal trend.
The norm is that Jews are going to be hated. The norm is that things are going to happen to them. The norm is that things are going to, we're not going to do so well in the world. We need Hashem's protection. And if we just say, okay, whatever, then He says, I'm just going to stand back and let it happen.
Wow.
And that's an important part of the Tochacha that we.
It's like saying, if you want to be like all the other nations, without special protection,
go right ahead. Let's see how it works out for you. That's basically that's a lot of the message of the text.
Sure.
However, it's not completely true, as he will see in this pasuk. He says sometimes he actually brings stuff upon us for particular reasons, and that's part of what this is. And the pasuk is at the beginning there that this is going on. This is after Hashem already says, I'm going to remember the covenant with Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob, which again, I'm not. That's the usual thing I talk about with Bechukosai. I'm not talking about that tonight. But after that, you still remember, even when you're in the lands of your enemies, Lo ma'astim, v'lo galtim, I will not. Ma'astim means make repulsive. They won't be repulsive to me. Lechalosam, to destroy them. Lahafer briti itam, ki ani Hashem Elokecha. You might want to pasuk about it. It's a little bit of a strange pasuk. I won't. I wish I could translate this better. My brain is only not working at a certain level. I won't do it lahaper bri'itam to destroy my covenant with you. Because I am Hashem your God. It's a strange pasuk. What does that mean? See, he says, and I put line numbers on the side there, so hopefully we can coordinate where I'm up to. So he starts with there on line 2. Ha'inyan hu, what is this about? Let's think about the way that Hashem runs the world as much as we can understand. Ki kasher gozra ha'chochmah ha'yona she'Yisrael yisnodadu ba'artzo shanim rabim ma'od when Hashem decided that the Jewish people are going to have to wander for many years in many places until the time when the ultimate goal comes, which we can't reveal. So they had to come up with some method that we won't assimilate, we won't get lost, we won't lose our identity. Okay, that's the big challenge, as we know all too well today, of the goal. It's probably today almost more than any other time. I don't know if there have been such a high rate of assimilation and intermarriage, and such a low. We live in the Orthodox. I mean, a lot of people here, not so much, but I think you all know people who live in the Orthodox bubble think everything's wonderful and great, and Torah is growing, and they don't step outside Borough Park and Lakewood and Muncie. It's a different world out there, and what's going on in the Jewish world, even in Manhattan and other places. It's we're losing it fast. So what do we do to avoid that? Okay, so the ha'ira al ze gedolei ha'uma. So Hashem awakened the great people of the nation, that they had to make different skidarim and siyagim those are signs, those are ways, those are different items. Asher ha'uma titkayem b'shon galayam, so that we can survive in the waves of the great sea out there. V'lo titbad b'mitzulot hasa'ar, and not get drowned in the storm. Hashotet b'ruach hamitz v'kabir, that's storming against us at all times.
Wouldn't just keeping the Torah work?
No. In short. He's references here in the notes. He references there's another major essay that he has in Parshas Bo, in which he talks about that, and I think you all know this. What does it say in Mitzrayim? How come we were sold? How come we survived in Mitzrayim?
Kept our language, our clothing.
Right, exactly. Shino is Shema, Musha, Lashon. Right, they didn't change their Jewish language. They didn't change their clothing. They didn't change external things. And over there, there's a whole long essay to show that in terms of the mitzvahs, they weren't doing so well in Mitzrayim. In fact, what
were the mitzvahs in Mitzrayim?
To whatever they had, a lot of that. It says that bris milah. A lot of them, we see that there was a major bris milah at the end. What happened? Right, they weren't keeping bris milah. They weren't keeping this. They weren't keeping that. They were a lot of the traditions that they had. They weren't keeping. The thing that kept them separate as Jews was Shema, Malbushim, Shon, which he says are external things. Mm-hmm. And he has a whole very interesting essay there showing that at times of stress, keeping the Torah is great, of course, and for those who do it, great. But the things that are really going to hold us together as a people are if we keep our, I don't want to say our cultural norms, because there's all kinds of Jews from different cultures, but if we keep those things that remind us externally that we're Jewish. Now, of course, Hasidim take that to an extreme, with the way they keep their dress separate and their language separate, etc. And, while you can say a lot of things about the Hasidic community, and there's a lot of problems here too, there's no question at some level that they are better at avoiding assimilation at some level than others are. Other groups will say you don't have to, dress in a bekisha and white socks, but it is important to know what styles of the non-Jewish world around us we can accept as being the proper way for a dignified Jewish woman or man to dress, and which are not. Which names we should call ourselves, and when we should remember our Jewish names, when we should remember the way that we talk. We'll sometimes make fun of all the Baruch Hashems and Baruch Hashem, but please God. But a Jew who wants to maintain something has to know that we talk differently, we look differently, we speak differently, and those are the things he says actually are even more powerful sometimes than the mitzvahs themselves in keeping us in a stressful time. It's a very interesting essay. Maybe another time we'll read that one.
Wow.
But definitely defining characteristics that are clear to others as well as ourselves.
Yeah. Sure.
Very interesting.
So he said that's what we have to do. V'hinei harishon, I'm in line 6. Who's the first one who did this? Yaakov Avinu. Right? Ra'ad she'yikra otanu b'atzvot yamin. Now, Yaakov Avinu, he said, was in a very interesting time. If you think about it, that was the first Golus, right? Now, of course, he personally went to Lavan and all that, but as a nation, that was the first Golus, is when we went down to Mitzrayim. And Yaakov was very concerned. The Parshas Vayechi, you look throughout, Yaakov was worried about one thing more than anything else. What was he worried about?
He was worried about, I guess, losing his children. And
Why? After all, he had, it says, his whole life had a rough life in Mitzrayim. Were the good years, right? His whole life from the beginning was excellent, and love all of this. He goes, finally, he had the last 17 years of his life. He sat back, he was a Sabbath, all his children around, they lived, the viceroy of Egypt took care of them, they lived in luxury, they had everything they needed, nobody's persecuted, everybody's respected, every Paro loved him. Should have been the best time of his life.
he was worried that he
What?
was
But he was insisting, do not bury me in Mitzrayim. Do not bury me in Mitzrayim, right? And he made Yosef swear to that. And he made him go back, and if you think, I don't have time to go into it, but some say that was the biggest funeral in history. The entire Egyptian government went with thousands of people traveling all the way back, right, to bring the patriarch back, and he made a big deal of it, right? Right? And why? He says, Chashav, he said, if you're going to have a group of 70 people in such a nation, and that wasn't just Mitzrayim was a powerful nation. Egypt was it. That day, Egypt was the dominant culture of the world. We didn't go to Megiddo today, or blessed today.
Yes.
But a big part of the story in Megiddo actually is the wars with Egypt. When we read Chumash, sometimes we get the mistaken impression that Mitzrayim was a great power and that Kriyas Yamsuf, Egypt was destroyed and that was it, no more Egypt, and it's not at all what happened. What exactly happened and how the Jewish people related to it and all that is not so clear, but Egypt was a major power for a very long time after that too. The two dominant powers in the area were Mesopotamia and Egypt, and Eretz Yisrael in between. Megiddo was one of the places where they passed through. So I'm saying, anyway, without getting into Megiddo, I'm saying it was a major power, and it wasn't just that, as we all know. The culture of Egypt, the museums are full of, that was, as Rome was later, or Greece, Egypt was for millennia, was the dot. And so here you have a small family, 70 people, but how are they going to survive in such a thing? Right? Halo yitbolelu v'yitbatlu. Echad b'revos revava. They're going to assimilate, one in the tens of thousands. So Choshev Tachbula Beitzer, he came up with an idea. Shebanavi mitzuyanim b'bigdeim b'shmoseim. Here he brings it in, that they should have their own way of dressing, their own way of talking. V'lachein hayu Yisrael l'goy b'fnei atzmo v'mayu Yaakov v'yikol shevet kavushav. Therefore they'll remain by themselves. But he made sure, I don't want to be buried here, because if I want buried here, Harei hayu mityashin Eretz Canaan, they would say, you know what? The Al Heyman and Eretz Yisrael, very nice, but Yaakov was buried here, we're successful here, our guy is the king here. We'll think about it, Eretz Yisrael. Like, unfortunately, since then, everybody says, someday we'll go back to Yerushalayim, I don't know if you're familiar with the Sefer HaKuzari, where Rabbi Yehuda Halevi talked so much about how important Eretz Yisrael is. And if you're familiar, it's a discussion between the Jewish sage and the king. And at some point, after he goes on and on and on about how important Eretz Yisrael is, the king says to him, "Excuse me, why aren't you there?" and
Say here, better than in the U.S.
And he said, "Hovashtani, you caught me. You caught my, I don't really have an excuse." And I have to admit to you that when we say, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, we're just parakeets swapping away, but we don't really mean it.
Wow.
And and it's our shame and us. And
Well,
of
that
course,
was then, and it was very hard to get there.
and that was then, and he actually did go, and he was trampled to death when he got here. But that's a whole other story. But Yehuda Levi was he probably wrote the single most beautiful song to Eretz Yisrael, Tzion Haloti Shali L'Shlom Asirat, one of the keynotes. But it's a problem. So if you buried there, they would get away, right? So therefore, he commanded them to be buried there. Skipping to line 11, Uvazen Nikvahan Benafsho Banav Kishur Tiv'il Hishtokek El Eretz Avosei, and through that they developed this deep natural connection to long for the land of their forefathers, and to think of themselves not as landed citizens but as foreigners who are just here temporarily. Where do we see this? In the Hadassah, right? And he's quoting it here. It says Vayogor Sham, right? We say this in the Hadassah. What does that mean? Malamed Shelo Yorad Yaakov Avinu L'Hishtagei L'Lagur Sham. Yaakov only went down not to stay there. He had to go down because there was no food, there was this and that, to see Yosef. But he was planning to come back. He wasn't planning to stay there. Right? Perish.
So Yagur is temporary. The word Yagur is a temporary
It's the same letter as a carrot.
Like it says in the Haggadah, it says sojourn.
Right? Okay, I don't know. Is that Maxwell?
Translation.
No, but it's like Because sojourning is temporary.
Yeah.
As
Okay.
opposed to living somewhere,
Or dwelling.
which is, or dwelling, which
Yeah.
is more permanent.
Yeah.
You should.
Right. So
You should. Like the more permanent.
what?
Is you should the more permanent one? Like
I guess. But what it does say in the end of Parshas Vayigash, I think the last pasuk says, "Bnei Yisrael they didn't look at it that way. They I always read that pasuk. I think of Gone with the Wind, Tara. They became their place. This is our place. We're staying here. We're building our mansions here. We're building our life here. Baruch Hashem, all of us who've managed to come to Eretz Yisrael know how hard it is to leave there. I know how many people there are just, Eretz Yisrael, nice someday, but that's not home. Home is there. I think it, but I shouldn't say it, but I always wonder. Mashiach came tomorrow. How many people are moving here from Lakewood and Muncie and Passaic, or just coming for Yom? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I'm afraid to think about it too much. So anyway, that's what so therefore Yaakov wanted it to be that way, and then he considered also Yosef had that message: Hashem will take you out, etc. Shvatim, okay. And what happens is, and therefore I'm in line 14. What happened? Hashem caused was Vayakutsu mipnei bnei Yisrael. It says Hashem turned the Egyptians when they started not going that way. Hashem caused Vayakutsu shehayu nechshavim beinehem kekotzim, that the Jewish people began to feel to the non-Jews like thorns. What he means here is not so much that they were a pain to the Egyptians, but kishakotz eno nisbach ba'oseh shrashim b'shar. The thorns don't sort of connect with the tree directly. They stay on the outside. They're outsiders, right? Shelo dimu es atzman lemitzrayim v'hayu nifradim. They remained separate from the Egyptians. B'tchunotehem v'har gushotam, in the way they were, in the way they felt, until they were like the Mitzrayim, like a kotz. Okay. So all these things helped in Mitzrayim. Skipping to the next paragraph. V'hinei me'eit hayot Yisrael ba'goyim b'rabot hashanim. When the Jewish people were in many nations, lo ha'aminu kol yoshvei sevel, and in fact, and this many people have commented on, from Mark Twain to who knows whom, that the greatest miracle in history is the survival of the Jewish people. Right? We're an ancient nation. Well, some people say there are other ancient nations, like the Chinese, whatever, but the big difference, Chinese were always in China. We are all over the world. We don't have our own land. We don't have our own common culture. We're all the place. We're persecuted. We're pushed, but somehow we're still around. Even if the Palestinians claim, so-called, that they're part of the ancient nation of Palestine that nobody heard of before 40 years ago. But we're here, right? Asher lo yishar machshavas adam maskil. Nobody can really understand it. Hayodea korot hayamim hamitzulot sheshatfu b'alfei hashanim. Who knows all the different things happened in thousands of years. Al am ma'at berafa koach, on a nation that was small and weak and without its own protectors, which is such a great. And he says that's one of the great miracles that we have. 21. The way is that if Hashem, looks at us, this is the way history's happened. This is where he starts his very famous analysis. He says that what happens if you look over the course of Jewish history, this is a cycle that's repeated itself again and again. What happened? Yanuchu Meshech shanim karv lameo matayim. People, they'll go to some place, they'll go there, they'll develop, they'll live there 100 years, 200 years. V'achar zeh yakum ruach se'ara, and inevitably something's going to happen. Some great storm's going to come. V'yafutz hamon galav, and all of a sudden there's going to be this great wave that happens. V'yitalav yivle, it'll go, it'll destroy. Yeshtof lo yachmol, won't allow to continue. Ad ki Nivzorim, Pedurim, Yerubedudim, until they'll have to run and go from place to place. Yibrechul Machum Rachok V'Sham Yisachta. Go somewhere else. Leave Anatevka. Right? Go to the new place.
Leave
And
Spain.
there once again get
Like
together.
Spain.
What?
Leave Spain.
Spain. Yeah. I just thought of that. And again come to they'll become a people. And then Yugdal Torasam, Torah will once again regenerate. Chochmasam Yasu Chayil, they will begin to develop Jewish wisdom again. And then what happens? Eventually, Yishkach. Forget again that it's in a strange place. This is the new normal. The new place. Yachshov will think, Zezeh makom achzato. This is my new Altahein. Right? And Bal Yitzapel Yishuas Hashem Haruchanius Bizman Moed, and you forget, and the desire for Mashiach and for the eventual redemption is going to recede. And then what will happen? Yavor Ruach Sarah Odchel Techazak. Another storm will come. Yaskir Oto B'Kol San Varash, and will remind him, Yehudi Ata, you're a Jew. Misam Chalayish, who do you think you are? Lech Lecha Al Eretz Asher Ladata. Once again, go somewhere else. Kacha Yachlif Matzav HaYisraeli V'Kiyumo Ba'amim. So it's going to go again and again throughout the nations. Kasher Ayin Hamaskal Yir B'Divrei Yomim. If you look through history, this is a description of what has happened again and again and again. He says, "V'zel shnei sibos." In line 26. There are two reasons for this. L'kiyum Hadassah Amiti B'Tar Rosso. For first of all, so that the religion can continue, because right and if Kishayanuach Yisrael B'Amim Yafriach V'Yagdil Tarasso Pulpolo B'nei Yisrael Yizgadru. Okay, because when you start again, it's a good thing. People have this incentive to build something, to come together, to rejuvenate, JEW, to once again bring things back, to restore, as Baruch Hashem probably today greater than just about any other time in history. What's been many have commented on this so many times on the unbelievable resurgence of the Jewish people and after the Holocaust, and particularly the Olam HaTorah. And I was also talking about this basically in terms of Sunday's Yom Yerushalayim. Mm-hmm. Yom Yerushalayim is a little bit of a forgotten holiday, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. I remember when I was younger, when after 1967, it was a big deal. And in fact, even in the religious world, there was, as we know, there are mixed opinions about Yom Ha'atzmaut, if we should celebrate it, we shouldn't celebrate it. It's a religious holiday, it's a Zionist holiday. Yom Yerushalayim was, something that pretty much everybody agreed that's a wonderful thing. Although today, pretty much the only ones who really celebrate Yerushalayim anymore are Batilumi. The rest of and maybe the Iriyav Yerushalayim, but most Chilunim have little to do with it.
Why is it?
Charedim don't have much to do with it.
You said the ones who celebrated are
Datilum?
Is that the one where they walk around the walls?
They walk around the walls.
My daughter did that.
Yeah.
I was not thrilled.
Yeah.
I never walking past it.
There's plenty of
It is the crowd.
there's plenty
There's
of
a lot of
presence.
presents.
But I mean, I think there've been many miracles in the state of Israel, but what happened in 1967 is probably as close as you get to the clear hand of God turning things around in the 6-Day War. Was an unbelievable time. And I think we spoke once before, one of the previous times we got together, about Rav Soloveitchik's knocks, that there are times that Hashem is knocking at the door and waiting for us to wake up and recognize Him. That was certainly one of the big ones. But it is what it is now, and I don't know how many people are going to celebrate it this year. But we should understand what we have, and that we have Yerushalayim, we have what we have. Even though to this, of course, in this our time now, after this, in this current terrible war, made a lot of backward progress in some ways, but But Baruch Hashem, there's still so much
Not
more.
more
What? So, anyway, see, he says, so that's one thing. But the other thing is, and this is also a very, very interesting thing that he says here, on line 27. Ki kacha chafetz ha'adam. It's a natural, he's talking here about a sociological, if you will, phenomenon. That every generation wants to make their mark.
True.
Every generation doesn't want to just ride the laurels of what their parents did. They want to go beyond that. Kacha chafetz ha'adam. This is the way that people are. Asher ha'acharon yichadesh yosif ometz ma shehaya de'elam midor hayashan. They want to discover things, reveal things, make things that the previous generation didn't know. V'zeh b'chochmat ha'enashut. And that's part of the human wisdom. Asher mekoran machtzebes shekol ha'anshei v'hanisayon b'zeh yiskadu rachronim. We find this all over. People try to do something that human progress, which is, I guess that's the way God designed it, that every generation should always look to do more. I used to be involved a little bit in studying patent law, and I forget who it was exactly, but I think in the 1930s they were going to close down the patent office because everything's already been invented. You know?
Well, it's a good thing to do that.
And it's, it's unbelievable. I mean, especially today, if you're even a little familiar with what's going on in AI and the latest technologies, the world is
very interesting.
Going to be completely different in 5 years in terms of technology. It's just everything is changing. It's unbelievable. It's scary, in fact, what the machines can do and how much you can't trust anything that you see anymore. What used to be that you saw a picture, okay, now I've seen it. You can't trust it. You can't trust movies. You can't trust nothing. Everything. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, but this is, is it good? Is it not good? I don't know. It's another debate. But we see that people have this idea, right, that they want to accomplish something new. I'm saying this is why the Meshech Chochmah is such a beautiful and insightful, important essay to read. Okay, and however, you have a problem. All that's great, but what do you do about Torah? Right? Are we always going to make Torah that they didn't know? How does that work? Right? Torah is a problem. There's a famous story, I'm sure most of you heard, where Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zatzal, was sitting on a plane with Yerucham Meshel, who was the head of the Histadrut. And, an old European Jew, spoke Yiddish, etc. And they were sitting, business class, and near each other, and schmoozing in Yiddish. And during the flight, Rabbi Yaakov had his grandson, children, sitting in the coach, I guess. They would come up every so, how are you? What are you doing? Can we get you something? Are you comfortable? And then he mentioned to him, I see the way your grandchildren are taking care of you. My grandchildren never do such a thing. Busy watching a movie that, care about me. So he said, there's a big difference between me and you. He says, why? Because basically what I teach them, how do start this? Right, what I teach them is that, we are B'nai Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and there's the Yeridas Hadoros, the greatest people were the Avos, and the Moshe, and the Tanoim, and the Marah, and Rishonim, and Chrim. Today we're on a much lower level than they were in those days. So when my grandchildren look at me, they look at me, a vestige from Europe, or, from the old Torah world, they see something they honor. But you teach your children that you evolved from an ape. So you're one generation closer to the apes. 2 generations. So why should they respect you? But he says with Torah, right? How's that going to work? So he says on line 29, Lo kein Hadassah Loki hanitan min hashamayim u'mekoro lo al eretz kotzei, right? So the people at that time, they tried to do greater things, but and then he goes into a whole discussion over here of in Eretz Yisrael also in those days when you had the proper Sanhedrin and the Beis Din and the etc. of Torah, right? It was important that people could come up with being mechadish the Torah, right? And then he writes, etc. And there was Urim B'Tumim and the Nevi'im, etc. Then Ruach HaKodesh, right? Okay, and all that was okay, and they could understand how and when was the proper way to expand, and when was not the proper way to expand. Okay, but in line 34, Lo Chen Bagola, that doesn't work that way so well in the exile. Shenismai Takibutz Ba'asifa B'Limud Torah. When we don't have the same ability to learn Torah at that level, we don't have the Urim B'Tumim, we don't have the base of English, we don't have any of these things. Shemitam Zen, that's why Ein Rishus L'Shum based in the Chadash Torah. That's why today we're very careful not to change decrees that they made in those days. It's a whole Torah not to go into now, but we know, they say, light bulb jokes. How many Orthodox rabbis does it take to change a light bulb? Change! Right? We don't do that. It's very rare. Right? So, it's mine, we don't have that ability. And we don't have a Navi, and we have a Mechitza Shel Barzel Mafsekes Bein Yisrael Yerushalayim. And now there's a wall between us and our Father in heaven. So what do? Okay, now I'm in the last paragraph. It's in English too, if you'd like. Kachi Darka Shel Ha'uma. This is the way of the nation. Shekasher Yikansu LeEretz Nachriya. When they come into, going back to his thesis from before, when they go into the foreign land, you ain't a B'nai Torah. Mostly the survivors who get there are not such Torah scholars, right? Kasher Nidal Deluminat Soros Vagzeres. After all, they're survivors. They had to go through who knows what, people. How much Torah could they carry with them? The few who got through were great. Talmid Chacham were great. And then a godly spirit will go through them and encourage them to go back to the way things were. Yilmadu, they're going to learn. Yarbitzu Torah, they're going to start teaching Torah. Yasu Niflos, and they'll accomplish great things. Ad ki yamod keren haTorah al ruma v'sion, they'll accomplish and bring the Torah back to its great place. And then what will happen? Eventually you'll come to a place, ein biyad hador lahosif, that, what's the next generation going to do? They already created Lakewood and Panovich and this and that and all the, they already created the great truth. They create. What's the next generation going to do? So, without going to where he's going, what do you think happens? Looking at our time. Mm-hmm. If we'll posit for the moment that the previous, let's say my parents' generation, or pretty much brought the Torah back to the way it was post Holocaust. So, what's the next generation going to do?
Good question.
I could see a few answers to that, but what have you observed happens?
Struggle to maintain.
What?
Struggle to maintain.
Some will struggle to maintain. Sure.
I would say they opened up multiple yeshivas all of the Jersey Turnpike, up and down the Jersey Turnpike, anywhere. Yeshivas all over the place.
Okay, a lot of yeshivas. Okay. I'm looking for, I guess what I see is there's some positive things and some not just positive things.
Right.
You isolate themselves. You become cut
I think that's part of it. It becomes a little beyond. There's some people who kind of took their eye off the ball and as of restoring Jewish life, and then they get into their bubble thing and their niche, and they somehow lose perspective. I don't want to go into a whole thing today, but and it's a complicated topic, but you certainly could see the divide today between a lot of the Haredi world and the rest of the state of Israel. I don't think that existed. I don't remember that so much when I was growing up. I mean, there would be certainly, well, that's a whole bugaboo I have, that there are different parts of the Haredi world, but certainly there was some part that was always pretty extremely anti-Zionist and all that. But for a lot of people, recognize, we're part of this country, we're part of growing, we have to take our part, we share with them, but now it's, the divide is so immense because somehow they feel we have to even more and more and more, going into what they think is the Torah life, but I think it's actually driving a lot of people away from proper things. And then the people on the other side who feel, okay, now, we have to take, the open Orthodox. We have to go, all kinds of new things. We have to go all the feminist issues, all the, etc. There's all the
female davening.
What?
The female minyan and the.
We have to develop the new ways of reaching out to God, new ways of understanding, new ways in which go beyond. It gets to a point where comes to a certain point, and then some people maintain, and some people go off this way, and some people go off that way. We got problems, right? And that's I think that's what he's talking about over here, right? Because each generation has to make their mark. I mean, you see that certainly, amongst either side, they feel that what my parents did, well, that was nice for them. We're gonna take it to the next level at whichever direction that goes.
Diversity.
What?
Diversity.
They always what?
They do
Diversity.
diversity.
Diversity. Yeah. Every they don't want to just carry on doing what my Rebbe showed me in 5th grade. I want to make my own mark on the world. Right? It's such an interesting essay that he has.
So is that a negative thing or a positive
What?
thing? That they want to push it to the next level, is that a positive thing? Or is it a
It's positive, but it's dangerous.
Can be
Right.
can be exclusive, and they don't let people feel left out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can lead to places where it's not supposed to lead. So because they think ein biyad hador lahosif mal hiskat, they don't have something to add. So what are they going to do? So what happens is, and this is what was going on in his time, that b'rayin kozeh b'asher enchilu b'seim, they begin to be critical about the traditions that were passed down to them. Yishayr chadashos b'shkoch ma'yahad le'umos b'snod somayam. They'll think about new things. And too many Jews will come up with idea with a lot of the stuff they pass down to us isn't so right. Who needs it, right?
It's interesting that he uses the word Israeli. The translation says Israeli, but they weren't like Israeli.
That's
but it works. It fits, unfortunately, very well.
Okay. Is gonna forget where they came from.
Travel the world.
He's going to think I'm a landed citizen. And so I don't have to spend so much time learning my religion. And I'll begin learning Lashonot lo, listening to other languages. Yolef mikmal kalta, v'lo yolef mitakanta, will learn from the bad things and not the bad things. And here's the money quote. Yachshov, he will think, Berlin hi Yerushalayim.
Right.
That Berlin is Jerusalem.
So prescient. This is way before that.
What?
Right.
Well, here on page 2, I quoted from you. If you look down at the bottom there, it comes from a synod of Reform rabbis in 1845, led by Rabbi Sammy. They were basically the Reform movement at the time, but they were very much was in the same relationist movement, where a lot of the purpose of Reform was to make us into better Germans, right? And they were afraid of being accused. The worst thing they could be accused of is dual loyalty. We're not interested in going back to Jerusalem. Berlin is under Jerusalem. And so they were saying, we have everything we need here. Right? And then we have universal brotherhood, etc. with Jewish patriarcharies. That's not that. That was where the quote came from. Right? On the side there, if you Google, you'll see many yeshivish places which say something like this. The Meshech writes a prophecy that Jews will say Jews. That's not what was going on. He was just quoting what happened over there. That was what they said. And what happened was, and he says, even then, you took the bad things from Berlin. You didn't take the good things. You could have taken some good things from the German customs of decency and fairness. I don't know, and integrity. That you didn't take. Right? So what will happen, he predicted, and this happened, as we all know too well, again, he died in the early 20s, Yavo ruach so'ah b'so'er, I'm afraid that a storm may come, Ya'akor oto migizo, and rip us out from where we were, Yanichuhu l'goy mirachok asher lo laman l'shano, will take us to another place where we don't know the language, and Yeda ki hu ger, and once again you'll know that you're a stranger. Lishono Sfas Kodshenu, that really our own language is our language. Lishonot Zarim Hema Kelabush Yachalof. Other languages are like a clothing that changes. Machsavtohu Gez Yisrael, but our essence is our Jewish, our basic Jewish stem. V'tanchumam nichumei Hashem, and what we should be thinking about is that from our Nevi'im, Asher Nibu al Geza Yishai Bechris Hayamim, who talked about the stem of Yishai at the end of times. And then, what? You'll go, forget the Torah, come back again, Yosef Ometz, etc., etc. Okay. And that's what happens. And now after having this whole long introduction, he says this, what's pshat in that pasuk? Okay? In line 47. V'zeh lo ma'astim. That's what I mean by lo ma'astim. After all, I was ma'astim, he's saying, right? I made you ma'us in the eyes of the nations.
Yeah.
So what does it mean, lo ma'astim? Miyasu al shifus ha'ima ha'uma b'tera b'haskala ruchanis hamufas b'tera sein v'tzulim v'sor. Mius was when people felt very down about the Torah, which is an our Masorah. Lo galtim, and when I galtim, when you were from place to place, the point is you have to read the pasuk properly. I didn't do it lechalosa. I didn't do it to destroy you. On the contrary, right? Lahaver, because I wanted lahaver brisi to. I didn't want to just desecrate my peace, my covenant. Why? That's amshichas Torah. Why? Ki ani Hashem Elokecha, because I want to be your God. Therefore, sometimes I'm going to have to make you go through things that will cause you to reject and be rejected by some of the things that took you away from my relationship with you. Ratzalomer, what do I mean? Shehagil v'hamius husiba, that these things are going to be a reason, Shani Hashem Lokechem, that I will maintain my relationship with you, I Hashem your God. Lo mius v'guyel mochletes l'chalosan. I haven't done it in order to just reject you. L'haver brisi tam chalila, wasn't my intent. But on the contrary, al yidei zeh yiskadel shmo v'yiskaimu goy zer Avram, through this Hashem's name will continue, it will prosper, zer amunim, a faithful nation, Roy v'omei l'kabel hamatar l'lokis, who are going to be willing and able to accept their godly purpose, which will happen to us someday, etc. That's that. So it's a very, very, I think, interesting and important essay. It talks about how we are, and again,
How does he explain lo ma'astim?
What?
Pasuk says
He's reading it. Lo ma'astim l'chalosa. Lo ma'astim lo gam l'chalosa, but I did it in order to that it should be K'ani Hashem Lokechem. In order that I should be able to be a God. And therefore there were times that I was ma'astim, but what purpose was not l'chalosa. The purpose was so that I should maintain my relationship. So that's the Meshech Chochmah.
That's pretty fascinating.
What?
The ones who are pushing to do more and feel there's nothing left to do, so they go out looking for something completely new. So he said he's going to cause the storm to come again.
Mm-hmm.
What about the other side that is progressing in Torah, that wants something completely new also? What happens to that group? I mean, could they have a storm come and blow them away too and start over again? I don't know.
I can't tell you, but I know only Kodesh Baruch Hu knows, but I can tell you this.
Are both sides wrong?
No, my guess would be is where the general direction of the people are going. I mean, Rabbi Avigdor Miller talks about this a lot, and many others, that even though we tend to think that the Holocaust destroyed Judaism, etc., but if you want to be real, we have to, and I don't agree with Rabbi Miller's whatever my worth that in which he tries to explain the Holocaust. I think that's going too far. But he does point out accurately and importantly that Yiddishkeit in Europe was going down fast, and in almost all places, we tend to, again, in the frum world, they tend to talk about the storybook, and every kid in Europe knew Shas when they were 10, and there was Shtetlach were full of wasn't true.
Not quite.
You know, I always tell people that I think Fiddler on the Roof is actually an important story, and I think it was, even though we don't like to see it that way, it was fairly accurate. There was the rabbi and his few talmidim who were doing their thing, but most people, you know, what the tavyas? Why did they do this? Why did they do that? Did they know anything? They knew one thing. Tradition. Azeret Damam Getun. That's what this one, that's what that one did. And they didn't really know that much. Shabbos was beautiful, but it's also true that, you know, as they say, the rivers around Ellis Island were full of sheitlach and tefillin, etc. It's an amazing thing that from a predominantly Orthodox culture, such a small percentage survived in the new world. I used to be a big Mad Magazine fan, so they used to have these. If you remember, always look at the various movies, and they had their own take on the movies. If you're familiar with Mad, so they had one on Fiddler on the Roof, which was really good. It was called Antenna on the Roof. And it was basically a view of Tevye's grandchildren in Scarsdale and how it worked out for them. You know, and you could only imagine. It was written by old Jewish writers, and it was, you know, how much of it lasted in the next generation, and you know that was not a untypical story. Of so many shtetblach, etc. Of course, the greatest gedolim, we don't have anybody like the people in Europe, but only God knows the answer to that question. But or at least Rabbi Miller argues, and others argue that something had to happen. Something had to wake us up. We were headed on a path. Now, was the Holocaust necessary? I'm not going to go there, but you know, that's whatever. You know?
Well, he didn't say that. He didn't say that the Holocaust was or wasn't necessary. He said that it was divine madness, and that Hashem was so disappointed.
Oh, for sure. And part of it happened, of course, also, as we said before, you don't want God in the picture, okay? Not in the picture, you know. And then you're going to have madmen who are going to do crazy things.
You have, Moses Mendel's grandchildren were essentially Goyim.
Yeah,
she had the first Christmas tree.
Yeah, that's true. I'm not going to go through it, but you can read it. Jonathan Rosenblum wrote a very interesting article in the last 2 pages about a year ago, where he talks about this a little bit. And amongst the things that he just said, I just read that one line there.
You're going to another cycle.
The Fieldstone School was founded in 1878 by Felix Adler, the son of the reformed rabbi of Manhattan's Temple Emmanuel, which later became infamous for its inability to identify a single Jewish descendant of the original founders a century later. Pretty amazing. And that's true. I mean, a lot of times people talk about, Reformed Judaism has this tradition of, 150 years. There are very few identifiable Jews who are most of today's Reformed Jews are not. Yeah, they're descendants of Orthodox Jews, or not Jewish at all.
Right.
I mean, the rabbi of the biggest Reformed temple in Manhattan today is a Japanese convert. I think. What? She has a beautiful voice. Good performer. But it's that's what he writes about this. Interesting. His article is about how he's saying how it's playing out with all the elite colleges, and how with all the pro-Palestinian, they're forgetting what being Jewish is, and they're taking on more and more and more of the anti-Jewish thing because they're trying to say the Judaism that our parents were presented to us when that's not good enough for us. But that also reminds me of there's a very fascinating essay I once read. Rabbi Schiller actually introduced me to it. Not to Schiller. It was an essay by Kafka called "The Letter to My Father." You can easily get it online. It's very fascinating. Well, Kafka was, was a little bit of a strange guy, but a very insightful writer, and he writes about how his religious development. Apparently, his father used to take him to shul.
and he was always told, sit there, be quiet, etc. Look in your book, don't talk. Meantime, his father would schmooze with his friends, and etc. And that they would go. And then he was saying, I was just bored. I didn't know what I was doing. I was forced to be in a place I wasn't allowed to do anything, etc. And then it was uninteresting. This cantor would go, couldn't go to that. And then he would, he found the only interesting thing is when they opened the thing to take out the Torah. And once he went up to take it, and they yelled at him, "Why are you coming up here, kids?" And a few stories like that. And every time he would ask a question, he'd be criticized. Don't ask, just do. And I remember the line he said is, "Given the Judaism I was shown, the most pious thing I could do was to get rid of it as soon as possible."
I hear.
Very
A lot of people felt that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because I remember my friends in Yavna and people Academy, they said they weren't able to ask any questions whatsoever because the teachers would just cry because they were Holocaust survivors.
Yeah, a lot of them didn't know very much.
And they just...
And they certainly didn't know how to deal with American kids. I mean, I got my share of what my father would call the Board of Education.
That was from European.
It was a different time.
Right.
Different time.
Well, they had to water down the Hebrew school because the parents weren't from, and they from there. So, remember, Shabbos consciously exists. So, what do you talk about? Do you need peripheral things? What are you going to do? But told 19 kids in your school class, maybe 6 of us married Jews. 6 of us.
6?
6 of us married Jews.
Out of 19?
Yeah.
Wow.
But,
Nice.
I think I did. You married a Jew.
Baruch Hashem.
You.
All right, so that's what I have for tonight.
Thank you very much.
I hope it was
Glad you
interesting.
did.
Thank you.
Okay. Maybe another time I'll do that other piece, but I'm kind of winded myself, actually.
I love kind of stuff.
All right.
Thank you very much for coming out tonight.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, of course, to Avram and Shoshana.
I'm tired.
Thank you very much.
No, I don't know.
Looking for those cookies.
Okay. I probably should get over to Rabbi Stewart. What time is it?
Yeah.
42?
5.